Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take your stack of knowledge, all those articles, research papers, and notes, and distill them into clear, actionable insight.
And today, wow, we are strapping in for a massive trip down memory lane.
But the vehicle we're driving is, it's ultra-modern, incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
and just tiny.
We're talking about the golden era of gaming, that sweet, intoxicating period defined by the evolution of graphics,
Oh, yeah?
spanning from the blocky charm of 8-bit systems like the Sinclair Spectrum and the Commodore 64.
Yours computer.
All the way through the dazzling 16-bit age of the NES and the Sega Mega Drive, right up to, well, the birth of 3D polygons with the original PlayStation.
That era, roughly the early 80s through the late 90s, it's cemented a core gaming experience that millions of people still cherish.
Absolutely. And that enduring nostalgia for those systems, that desire to capture the exact, untainted tactile and visual experience has driven this absolute explosion of innovation.
And at the center of that innovation, almost entirely, is one piece of hardware, the Raspberry Pi.
That's it. This small, low-cost, single-board computer, and particularly the ridiculously powerful Raspberry Pi 5, has become the absolute centerpiece for retro gaming preservation and just some incredible DIY projects.
So our mission today, using all this amazing source material you've shared, is to really unpack the practical reality of setting up a truly high-fidelity retro system. We're going from zero to hero here.
We are.
That means covering the necessary hardware stack, navigating the, let's be honest, complex and sometimes murky landscape of emulation software.
Including the legal quicksand.
Yeah, exactly. And the most exciting part for me, showcasing some truly inspiring, custom-tailored DIY projects that people are building in their garages.
Well, the materials we have give us a fantastic roadmap. We start with the basics, the necessities and software choices. Then we can push the limits of what the RPI 5 can do, getting into those 6th-generation consoles.
The ones that used to be impossible on a Pi.
The impossible ones. And from there, we move into the specialized hardware. The Tro controllers, the bespoke handhelds. And then, finally, we get to the really fun stuff.
The custom build.
The deep dive into custom builds, the digital archaeology of recreating vintage machines, and exploring how the Pi is being used not just to play old games, but to actually create new ones in that retro style. It's a full-spectrum view of the modern retro gaming movement.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the foundation. The hardware prerequisites. Now, if you're new to this whole ecosystem, the good news is that setting up a basic Raspberry Pi is vastly more streamlined than it was even 5 years ago.
Oh, thank goodness for that.
We're generally looking at modern Pis here, the RPI 5, RPI 4, maybe the 3B plus RAN, or even the keyboard-integrated RPI 400 models.
And the really nice thing is that the basic setup process for just getting them up and running is remarkably consistent across these newer generations.
That consistency is key, isn't it? It lets the community focus on the software.
It's essential. It allows that massive community of software developers to focus on performance and features rather than constantly rewriting drivers for every new board revision. So the core component is, of course, the Pi itself.
Right.
But to transform that single board into a functional gaming console, you need a few essential pieces of kit. And the requirements are, well, they're getting a little stricter as the boards get faster.
Okay, so let's start with storage. The micro SD card. The sources say 8 GB or larger, but that feels like the bare minimum.
It is. 8 GB will get you started, but you'll run out of space fast.
Yeah.
More importantly, it's the speed of the card that matters.
The speed class.
Absolutely. We have to remember, this tiny micro SD card is acting as the machine's entire hard drive. It's not just storing games.
It's booting the OS, running the emulators, everything.
Everything. So if you use a slow, old card, you're just creating bottlenecks everywhere. You get slow boot times, stuttering when you're launching big CD-based games, lag when the system tries to load save states.
It's a false economy to go cheap on the card.
A huge one. A modern high-speed Class 10, or even better, a U3 card, makes a palpable, noticeable difference to the overall responsiveness of the entire system.
And then there's power. This seems to be a major sticking point, especially for the latest generation. The sources are very explicit.
Yep.
For the RPI 5, you need a high-quality USB-C power supply, like the official 15.3-watt one.
This is non-negotiable.
Why so strict for the Pi 5?
Well, the RPI 5 represents a just a monumental leap in computational capability. We're talking 2 to 3 times the power of the Pi 4.
Okay.
And that power translates directly into a higher power draw, especially when the CPU and GPU are under maximum load during, say, complex emulation.
So if you use your old phone charger.
You're going to have a bad time. You run the risk of what's called a brownout. The voltage dips for just a millisecond. When that happens, the system can become unstable, you'll see glitches, or it'll just shut down completely.
Right in the middle of a boss fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For high-demand tasks like emulating a Dreamcast or a GameCube, that dedicated 15.3-watt supply is absolutely vital for stability.
Connectivity is another one of those little details that can trip up new users. The physical ports on these tiny machines are specialized.
That's right. The modern Pis, specifically the RPI 5, the 4, and even the 3B Plus AT, they've all moved away from that standard full-size HDMI port.
They're using micro HDMI now.
2 of them on the 4 and 5. So you need a micro HDMI to HDMI cable or a reliable adapter to connect to your TV or monitor. It's a small component, but if you don't have the right cable, your project just stops, dead in the water.
And for the initial setup, you can't get away with just a controller, right?
Not really. For that initial setup and any kind of text configuration, entering your Wi-Fi password, tweaking settings in a config file, a USB or Bluetooth keyboard and mouse are pretty much necessary. You can put them away later, but you need them at the start.
So once all the physical bits are connected, the setup process itself has gotten impressively simple.
It's all thanks to the Raspberry Pi Imager. It's a fantastic official utility that runs on any standard Mac, Windows, or Linux computer.
And it does all the heavy lifting.
Completely. You just select the operating system you want, whether it's the standard RPOS or one of the dedicated retro gaming distros we're about to talk about. You select your microSD card, and the Imager handles all the complicated file system formatting and writing.
So it turns that little piece of plastic into the bootable, self-contained brain of your new retro console.
Exactly. And that process immediately leads us to the first crucial fork in the road, the software choice.
Right. You can run emulators on the standard Raspberry Pi OS desktop, which is a full computer experience.
Or you can opt for one of the dedicated, streamlined, all-in-one emulation distributions.
What's the case for just using the standard desktop?
Well, running that full desktop environment, the whole Debian ecosystem, is fantastic if your goal is more than just gaming. If you want to use the Pi as a general-purpose computer, or if you plan on emulating very specific older microcomputers like an Amiga or an Atari ST.
Things that need a desktop to manage files and stuff?
Precisely. Those often require specific desktop applications or complex file management that's just easier with a mouse and keyboard in a familiar environment. But for pure plug-and-play couch gaming console emulation,
That's where the distros come in.
that's where the community almost universally turns to the big 3 all-in-one distros.
And these big three are, from what I've read, architecturally different. They each cater to a distinct priority: speed, ease of use, or customization.
That's a perfect way to put it. Let's start with Laka. This distribution is designed by the Libretro team, and its entire focus is just raw, unadulterated emulation performance.
So it's stripped down to the bare essentials.
To the studs. It's a minimalist Linux operating system built primarily around the RetroArch front end and the Libretro library of emulator cores. The key word there really is minimalist. Laka strips away all the non-essential services you'd find in a normal desktop OS.
So no web browser, no Office suite.
Nothing. What makes Laka stand out is its console-like user interface. It doesn't use the typical desktop metaphor with windows and icons. It looks and feels like a PlayStation or an Xbox interface.
And that minimalism translates to speed.
Directly. Because it's so lightweight and focused, it's essentially running RetroArch directly on the hardware with very little overhead. Laka consistently delivers the best raw emulation performance, especially on older, more resource-constrained devices like a Pi Zero or an RPI 3.
So if your only goal is the highest possible frame rate for 16-bit or 32-bit systems with the least amount of fuss, Laka's the one.
That's your choice, absolutely.
Okay, moving on, we have Recalbox. This one is often cited as the most user-friendly choice, the one that's perfect for beginners who just want to get up and running quickly.
Recalbox is all about convenience. It's engineered to automatically detect and configure a huge variety of retro gaming hardware, saving the user the headache of manual file editing and driver installation.
But it has a specific technical trick up its sleeve, right? Something about old TVs.
It does. Its key technical differentiator is its commitment to authentic visual output. Recalbox is known for its really robust support of high-quality CRT display output via the GPIO pins.
Okay, unpack that for us. Why is CRT output via the GPIO pins so crucial for the purists?
Because it allows for the authentic replication of scan lines. Modern flat panel displays, they interpolate pixels, which leads to a very sharp, blocky look that was never the original intention.
Right, the games were designed for blurry, interlaced TVs.
Exactly. They were designed for the fuzzy glow of a CR2 monitor. Using the GPIO pins with some specialized hardware allows Recalbox to output a signal that perfectly mimics that classic resolution and scanline effect. It's vital for replicating the genuine visual feel of systems like the NES or a Neo Geo arcade board.
So it's the choice for authentic visuals.
And out-of-the-box support. Recalbox often includes a wider variety of non-default emulators pre-installed, so it just works with more stuff from the get-go.
And finally, we have the highly customizable veteran, RetroPie. This one takes a fundamentally different approach. It's built on top of the full Raspberry Pi OS.
And that full Debian operating system lurking underneath the gaming interface is the source of both its greatest strength and its primary drawback.
The double-edged sword.
Completely. Its strength is maximum flexibility. RetroPie supports dozens of different emulators, and because it has a full OS underneath, you can easily add utility tools, scripts, or even other specialized applications that aren't purely for gaming.
So if you want to really tinker, write your own scripts to manage game collections or do some advanced networking stuff.
RetroPie is unmatched. It's a tinkerer's dream. But the drawback is that all that extra overhead from the full OS can slow things down, especially when you're pushing the system to its limits.
Which is why the sources note that, historically at least, RetroPie has performed a bit less efficiently with those 5th and 6th generation consoles.
Precisely. It's a trade-off. It's not as lean and mean as Laka or a dedicated installation. That said, its huge support community and incredible flexibility make it an incredibly powerful choice if your priority is customization over, squeezing out that absolute last frame of performance from a really demanding emulator.
So, to sum it up, Laka for pure lean speed, Recalbox for plug-and-play ease and visual authenticity, especially on CRTs, and RetroPie for unmatched flexibility and deep customization. The architecture you pick really does dictate the rest of your retro journey.
And that journey in recent years has become so much more interesting. The real technical story isn't about how well a Pi can run an SNES game anymore.
It's always been good at that.
It's always been good at that. The measure of progress now is its ability to handle systems that were previously just considered too complex, too computationally taxing for a little low-cost computer like this.
And this is where the arrival of the Raspberry Pi 5 just completely changes the conversation.
It rewrites the rulebook. The massive jump in CPU and GPU power, we're talking up to 2 or 3 times faster than the RPI-4, that translates directly to a major upgrade in emulation performance.
It opens the door to smooth emulation of those traditionally difficult 5th and 6th generation consoles.
This is a huge win for preservation. We're now talking about fluidly running demanding systems from the late 90s and early 2000s. The original PlayStation, the Sega Dreamcast, and astonishingly, even some Nintendo GameCube and Wii titles.
That's incredible. These were systems that relied on complex 3D rendering and really specialized architectures.
Yeah, they required efficient JIT just-in-time compilation and significant graphical rendering power, something the older Pis they really struggled to deliver consistently.
So let's delve into the specific technical hurdles the RPI-5 overcomes. Let's start with the biggest challenge: Wii and GameCube emulation. The sources confirm this is achievable using the open-source Dolphin emulator on a standard RPIOS desktop environment.
Dolphin is a phenomenal piece of software engineering, but my word, it is resource-intensive. Achieving smooth frame rates on anything requires a lot of power.
So on the Pi 5.
You're leveraging every last bit of its power. Its superior thermal management, the faster memory access, it all comes into play. The setup requires meticulous configuration, including sourcing specific homebrew software and making sure the OS is properly configured for hardware acceleration.
And what about controls? The Wii had the motion controller.
Right, because of those unique input methods, the sources strongly recommend using a professional external controller, like the 8BitDo Pro 2. You connect it via USB or Bluetooth, and it just offers the stability and versatility you need to map all those complex console controls accurately.
Okay, next up, the beloved Dreamcast.
Wow.
This console has such a fiercely loyal following. Getting smooth emulation is a real technical achievement, and it relies on the Flycast emulator.
Flycast does the heavy lifting for the Dreamcast's unique architecture, but the physical console had this crucial defining piece of hardware that adds a whole layer of complexity to the emulation.
The VMU. Little screen in the controller.
The virtual memory unit, exactly. For anyone who missed the Dreamcast era, it wasn't just a save card.
Not at all. It was this weird hybrid device.
It was. It functioned, first and foremost, as the Dreamcast's flash memory card, but it also had that little monochrome LCD screen and basic controls. It acted as a second screen display,
It would show your health or maps.
or you could even play little mini games on it when it was disconnected from the console. So in emulation, Flycast has to simulate this entire dual-purpose device.
So in a Raspberry Pi setup, how is that actually handled?
It requires some careful configuration. You need to assign an area of your storage for the emulated VMU flash memory. And crucially, Flycast needs to either visually render that tiny second screen as an overlay on your main display,
Oh, interesting.
or in more advanced setups, people have used a dedicated small monitor or even a phone connected over the network to act as a VMU screen. Getting that right is essential for an authentic Dreamcast experience, especially for games that really relied on it for in-game feedback.
And finally, the original PlayStation, the PS1. Emulation here is really robust, handled by core systems like Mednafen or PCSX Rearmed.
And PS1 emulation is where we hit the hard wall of the legal landscape.
Right.
Unlike many of the older, simpler cartridge-based systems, PS1 emulation fundamentally requires specific proprietary firmware to function correctly. You need the official PS1 BIOS files.
And the emulator won't even run without them.
Mednafen in particular flat out requires them. These files, you'll see them with names like cf5500.bin, have to be sourced by you, the user, and placed into the correct system directory. And this requirement forces us to immediately confront the legal maze surrounding retro gaming.
Okay, let's tackle this head on, because this is the critical context listeners need to understand. The difference in legality between the emulators, the BIOS files, and the game ROMs.
The essential distinction is this. An emulator is just a piece of software that mimics hardware. And in most jurisdictions, developing and distributing emulators themselves is perfectly legal. They're just tools.
But the BIOS files, the console's low-level operating system, and the ROMs, the copies of the game data, those are protected by very stringent copyright.
So to use an analogy, the emulator is the car, but the BIOS is the ignition key, and the ROM is the fuel.
And making copies of the key and the fuel is where you get into that legal gray area.
A very gray area. The general legal consensus, and this varies by region, is that users must legally own the originals of the console to source the BIOS and the original game media to create the ROMs. And even then, it's typically only for personal backup use.
So just downloading BIOS files and ROMs from some random website, even if you own the original console and game.
That generally violates copyright law and distribution terms. There's no way around that.
This technical reliance on proprietary startup code creates a pretty significant barrier for people. The source table we have highlights a bunch of platforms that are particularly challenging because they absolutely require a BIOS file to run.
Yeah. Beyond the PlayStation, we're talking about systems like the 3DO, the Apple II, the Atari Jaguar, the Neo Geo, and the Sega Saturn.
All of them need a proprietary BIOS.
Every single one. And that BIOS has to be legally sourced. If you don't have a legitimate way to extract that code from the original hardware you own, you technically can't run the emulator in a legally compliant manner.
But there are some silver linings, right? Cases where the industry or the community has provided legal alternatives.
Absolutely. The sources list platforms where the BIOS files are legally available or free because the original copyrights have expired or the files have been released under open source licenses.
Like the Commodore 64.
For instance, the Commodore 64's OS can often be run using files sourced from the Eros project. The Commodore Amiga BIOS files can be legally obtained through commercial licensing from companies like Cloanto. For a system like MS-DOS, you can use the open source FreeDOS operating system as a legal equivalent.
And there was a fascinating footnote in the sources regarding some Sony PlayStation content.
Yeah, that note highlights how the lines are blurring a bit. While the commercial PS1 console required a specific BIOS, the official .mu SNK 30th Anniversary Edition actually included preloaded PSX middleware or BIOS component.
So a modern legal game release contained the necessary old code.
Exactly. It suggests that publishers, in their pursuit of official retro re-releases, are sometimes providing the required proprietary software in a legally licensed package. So they're inadvertently creating a legal avenue for that necessary code base, even if it's buried deep within a modern game file.
Which leads us naturally to the cleanest, most ethical path for sourcing game content: official digital storefronts.
This is the zero ambiguity route. If you want to build a Pi Retro system with absolutely no legal questions, you should be looking at platforms like GOG, Steam, or other specialized digital publishers.
They sell legally re-released classic games all the time.
Constantly. They're often optimized to run on modern systems, or they're packaged into bundles for DOS or Sega Mega Drive. Now, this content isn't always packaged perfectly for direct insertion into a Pi emulator.
You might have to do some work to extract the files.
You might, but it represents the legal, creator-supported route. And the source materials specifically called out platforms like itch.io as a fantastic place to find both commercial and open source retro collections, covering titles for the Mega Drive, the Master System, the NES, the SNES.
The point here is that the technical ability of the RPI-5 to emulate a Dreamcast is amazing, but the complexity of legally sourcing the necessary BIOS files remains the critical non-technical barrier for a lot of users.
It creates this really interesting friction point. The RPI-5 has the muscle to run the systems, but the legal framework requires either effort, patience, or purchasing official re-releases to remain fully compliant.
Okay, we've established the foundation, the hardware, the software, and the legal compliance. Now let's shift to the user experience. You can have the fastest RPI-5 in the world, but if your controller is laggy or uncomfortable, the whole experience is just ruined.
The right input device is absolutely paramount. You need low latency and high quality to replicate that original console feel. The 8BitDo Pro 2 controller is highlighted in our sources as a pro-grade controller that has achieved, it's near ubiquitous in the retro gaming community.
And that's specifically because of how well it integrates with Raspberry Pi emulation distros like RetroPie and Batocera.
Exactly. It just works. Visually, it looks a lot like a PlayStation DualShock, so you get that familiar, modern, comfortable feel, but it's packed with features that are really tailored for the retro enthusiast.
Like what? What makes it special?
Well, for starters, it has a really long-lasting 1,000 milliAh Li-ion battery, so you get up to 20 hours of gameplay. It supports both high-speed USB-C connectivity and stable Bluetooth 4.0.
And it's versatile.
Incredibly versatile. There's a simple physical switch on the back that lets you quickly toggle between different input modes: Switch, Apple, Android, and Windows X input. So if you move it away from your Pi, it's still highly compatible with your other devices.
But the features that really elevate it beyond a standard controller are the ones aimed at advanced users, right?
That's the 2 rear Pro buttons, the paddles on the back. These can be custom programmed. Think about mapping complex button combinations for fighting games or a turbo function directly to those back paddles. It's especially useful for older arcade titles that required simultaneous button presses.
It adds a layer of modern customization to a retro experience.
It really does.
Now, moving from that handheld controller feel to full arcade immersion, we have to talk about the impressive 8BitDo arcade stick. This thing is clearly designed to recapture that classic, sit-down, arcade cabinet experience.
It's a beast. It's designed for stability and tactile quality. It has a classic console color scheme, but it weighs a hefty 2.1 kilograms.
Ah, that's heavy.
And that weight is critical. It ensures the stick remains rooted firmly on your lap or a table. There's no shifting or slippage, even during the most intense button mashing sessions.
And the sources emphasize that its quality isn't just external, it's deep within the components.
Oh, absolutely. The internal architecture relies on high-end Sanwa internal parts. For arcade aficionados, Sanwa is the gold standard.
They're known for that clicky, responsive feel.
Exactly. They provide that highly responsive, satisfying click and the low actuation force you need for precision inputs. This ensures the responsiveness and durability that arcade veterans expect, and it distinguishes it sharply from those cheaper, generic arcade sticks that just feel mushy or laggy.
And in terms of flexibility, it seems to follow the Pro 2's lead.
It does. It offers both wired USB and wireless options, Bluetooth, and a fast 2.4G connection via a dedicated USB dongle. And like the Pro 2, customization is key. It has programmable macro buttons, but the real brilliance is that the joystick and all the buttons are designed to be easily swapped out.
So you can put in your own parts.
You can personalize the tactile feel, the tension, the color scheme of your controls down to the last detail. It's a hallmark of serious arcade hardware collectors.
These controllers prove that low latency quality input is a huge deal. But the hardware innovation moves beyond just external peripherals and into creating entirely new portable systems based on the Pi itself.
And this is the DIY spirit in action. The first major example here is a commercially available kit, the PiBoy XRS.
This is a complete Raspberry Pi 4 compatible handheld kit, and it's clearly an evolution of that classic Game Boy form factor.
The visual resemblance to the classic DMG handheld is undeniable, but the XRS crucially addresses the original's major functional limitations. It has much better ergonomics, dual analog sticks, and dedicated shoulder buttons.
Which means it can handle way more than just Game Boy games.
Of course, it can effectively emulate not just the Game Boy and SNES, but also systems like the PlayStation or Dreamcast, which absolutely require those analog and shoulder inputs. The sources rated it a 10 out of 10, specifically for its ease of assembly and its power. It can even run modern games via Steam Link when you combine it with RetroPie.
It's preservation through modernization.
That's a great way to describe it.
Okay, shifting to projects where customization and accessibility are the primary goals, we encounter the Alpaca controller. This is a 3D printed DIY controller powered by the tiny Raspberry Pi Pico microcontroller.
The Alpaca represents the accessible open source side of the community. It has this really distinctive, low polygon, almost retro-future aesthetic, which is dictated by the FDM 3D printing process used to make the shell.
And it's flexible in what it can do.
Very. It's designed to function as a computer mouse or a standard gamepad. The firmware is open source, so anyone can modify it. And because it's built around the Pico, it leverages the RP2040 chip speed for extremely low latency input. It's a highly responsive, personalized device, and it's proof that the Pico is an ideal platform for these kinds of dedicated interface devices.
And lastly, on the educational side, also using the Pico's strengths, we have the Kitronic ZIP96 Retro Gamer.
This is a fantastic teaching tool. It's a Pico-powered handheld designed primarily for learning to code. It takes the concepts of simple early video game design and makes them tangible for a learner.
What are the unique components here? It looks very simple.
The hardware is intentionally limited. It includes a Pico buzzer for sound, a vibration motor for haptic feedback, and a small but effective 12x8 LED matrix display.
So you're not playing Crysis on this thing.
Not quite. This setup encourages learners to use MicroPython to code simple games like Pong or Snake. The small resolution forces efficiency and creative coding, and it provides immediate visual feedback on that LED matrix. It perfectly embodies the educational mission of the Raspberry Pi platform, learning through making and playing.
This is where we move from buying kits to creating genuine, bespoke artifacts. The Pi ecosystem really encourages users to go beyond mere emulation and to engage in, digital preservation and art. This next section is just a narrative of ingenuity.
Starting at the very top. With high-fidelity, professional-grade creation, the sources feature fancy Octopus Arcades, the business founded by maker Shoni Strother. This shows the real commercial potential of Pi-based customization.
Shoni essentially took the hobby of building custom arcade cabinets and turned it into a full-fledged art and engineering endeavor.
That's right. These cabinets use emulation software like RetroPie, often layered with a front end like ArcadePunks, but the technical execution and the artistry is what really sets them apart.
The level of detail is just incredible.
These are not generic boxes, they're personalized works of art. They incorporate bespoke, painted artwork, highly specific vinyl cutting for graphics, and custom 3D printed parts for things like button bezels and speaker grills. We're also seeing unexpected features like internal rechargeable batteries for portability and programmable LED lighting systems.
And from a performance standpoint, what kind of components do you need to ensure these commercial-grade builds don't suffer from input lag? That's the killer for arcade games.
It is, and that's the most critical point for arcade purists. They rely on high-quality components, specifically zero-delay encoders.
Okay, what is that?
A zero-delay encoder is a little circuit board that converts the physical button press signal into a USB signal that the Raspberry Pi can read almost instantaneously. It's all about eliminating that input lag.
And you pair that with good buttons.
You pair that with high-end mechanical components like Sanwa buttons, known for their consistent, fast action, and an internal mini amplifier for robust sound. These cabinets preserve the entire experience of the arcade, right down to the tactile and auditory feedback.
Shifting our focus now from modern arcade cabinets to digital archaeology, the efforts to recreate vintage microcomputers. This requires not just software emulation, but meticulous hardware reproduction. Michael's recreation of the Sol-20 terminal computer is a perfect example of this dedication.
The Sol-20 was a highly influential but extremely limited edition 1970s microcomputer. I think only about 12,000 were ever produced.
So recreating one is a profound act of preservation.
It is. Michael described it as a long-haul effort. His reproduction uses a Raspberry Pi 4 hidden inside the shell to emulate the original 8080 CPU architecture. The whole process required custom-designed 3D printed components, sourcing a specific period-appropriate Keytronic keyboard, and just painstaking effort to recreate that 1970s form factor.
It's a reminder that the physical hardware matters just as much as the software running on it.
Absolutely. And he didn't stop there. He also tackled the MCM-70 reproduction, recreating a 1974 portable computer. That project involved custom keycaps, a dot matrix display simulation, and using a high-quality 3A Raspberry Pi PSU to power the whole complex system. These builds are exercises in historical accuracy and commitment.
And that concept, hiding modern tech inside vintage housing, is just beautifully captured by the ZX Spectrum Raspberry Pi cassette project, the stealth game loader.
This is pure constrained engineering genius. The project goal was simply to create a portable ZX Spectrum software loader. And to do it, a Raspberry Pi Zero W, a very small, low-power Pi, is physically hidden entirely inside a standard audio cassette tape housing.
A Pi Zero W inside a cassette tape. The space constraints must be insane.
They are extreme, and that's where the ingenuity lies. The Pi Zero W generates heat, and in that tiny sealed environment, heat management is crucial. The maker, Stewart, engineered a solution by cutting a custom heatsink from aluminum foil and placing it strategically inside the cassette shell to draw heat away from the processor.
That is brilliant.
It's amazing. The device runs Diet Pi and the Fuse ZX Spectrum emulator, and it achieves this perfect illusion. When you connect it, it simulates that slow, mesmerizing, and incredibly nostalgic tape loading experience perfectly.
The power of the Pi isn't confined to being the main computer, though. The Pico microcontroller is also being used to bridge the gap between classic hardware and modern emulation.
A fantastic example is the Pico PlayStation MemCard project by Daniel. He used the Raspberry Pi Pico to essentially reverse engineer and understand the proprietary communication protocol used by the physical PlayStation memory card.
Why is that technically challenging? Wouldn't you just read the data off it?
It's challenging because the memory card protocol is proprietary, and it's extremely timing sensitive. It requires precise synchronization and high-speed data handling that a normal computer can struggle with. But the Pico, with its dedicated RP2040 chip, is ideally suited for this kind of low-level, high-speed task.
So what's the practical outcome of this reverse engineering?
The resulting device can transfer save files directly between the physical PSX console, it plugs right into the memory card slot, and an emulator running on a PC or a Raspberry Pi.
Wow.
It provides a truly seamless way for gamers to move their saved data from their original physical console career into a modern emulated environment. It preserves decades of gameplay progress.
There's another powerful demonstration of the Pico's unique capabilities in the Commodore 64 Pico emulator by Kevin Vance. This project leverages a specific, very advanced feature of the Pico.
This takes us into some deep architecture. The Pico is running C64 programs by utilizing its PIO, or Programmable Input-Output functionality. This is the key technical insight here. The PIO is essentially a set of specialized state machines built into the RP2040 chip that run independently of the main CPU cores.
Okay, so why is that distinction so important for emulating an old system like the C64?
Vintage CPUs, like the Commodore 64 6510, they rely on highly accurate, cycle-specific timing for their input and output. A regular emulator running on a traditional OS often struggles to achieve this perfect timing fidelity because of operating system interruptions.
The PIO doesn't have that problem.
The Pico's PIO can simulate the C64 CPU's DMA port with cycle-accurate timing precision. This allows it to run C64 programs like the Game Frogs directly through hardware simulation. It's an incredible showcase of the Pico's versatility for low-level protocol emulation.
The focus on tactile and visual authenticity continues with Marin's CRT plus VCR Trinitron media player build. This project is a complete rejection of modern high-definition video.
It is. It focuses entirely on aesthetics and the experience of composite video output. An RPI is stripped down and placed inside a vintage VCR casing and then connected to a 14-inch CRT monitor, specifically a Sony Trinitron, which is highly sought after for its retro picture quality.
And the software running it reflects that commitment to the aesthetic, right?
Absolutely. The interface isn't some modern graphical UI. It's a bespoke retro GUI with white text on a blue background designed to perfectly emulate the menu systems of a 1980s VCR. It's a pure experience player designed to look and feel exactly like the media systems of that decade. It even intentionally simulates the visual noise of a VHS tape.
Then we have Neil Thomas's shop project, the Retro Barcode Scanner. This is a genuinely innovative use of the Pi to integrate physical media with digital convenience.
The concept is brilliant and elegant. A Raspberry Pi runs an emulator front end called Rattler. A user takes a physical game box, say, an original copy of Sonic the Hedgehog, and they scan the barcode. And Rattler instantly reads the code, cross-references it with the stored database, retrieves the corresponding ROM data, and loads the game on the monitor.
It creates a seamless physical shop browsing experience. You hold the artifact, but you play the digital copy instantly.
It's the ultimate fusion of collection and convenience. The Pi is acting as a rapid database lookup and launch system, using a familiar physical interaction to solve the digital access problem.
And finally, for streamers and content creators, the Game Boy Interceptor offers another crucial bridge between physical hardware and digital capture.
Sebastian built this device specifically to capture Game Boy gaming action for high-quality streaming. It uses an RP2040 microcontroller, the same chip that powers a Pico to emulate the Game Boy's graphics unit.
Why use a separate microcontroller for that instead of just a standard video capture card?
The RP2040 is used to achieve extremely high-speed memory access. It captures the video RAM data directly from the physical Game Boy cartridge and outputs it digitally via USB-C. This method is preferred by streamers because it provides high fidelity, low latency, and it avoids the often messy analog-to-digital conversion you get when trying to capture video from classic consoles.
So it's a cleaner signal.
Much cleaner. It can even be programmed to overclock Game Boy Color games to run at double their original speed, which is a testament to the RP2040's processing power in this specialized application.
These projects, they just demonstrate that the Raspberry Pi, whether it's the full computer or the Pico microcontroller, is the universal translator for digital preservation. It's enabling users to recreate, bridge, and innovate across decades of hardware.
We've seen the Pi used to consume, to preserve, to recreate. Now let's pivot entirely to creation. The Pi is a fantastic platform for development because it runs a full Linux environment and is compatible with so many modern, accessible coding tools.
The retro development scene on the Pi is surprisingly diverse, spanning from purely text-based narratives that are reminiscent of early computing all the way to full graphical engines.
Starting with interactive fiction and text adventures, we have tools for both the modern choice-based narrative and the classic parser-driven experience.
First up, Twine.
Twine is favored for its accessibility. It's a non-code-heavy tool designed specifically for creating choice-based narratives and interactive stories. If you want to write a branching story where the user just clicks buttons to advance, Twine is your best friend.
And it's easy to share what you make.
Incredibly easy. The output is standard HTML and CSS, which means it can be played in any web browser, including on a Raspberry Pi. The focus is purely on narrative structure and accessible design.
Then for the purists who remember games like Zork, there is Inform 7.
Inform 7 is the tool for building those classic, highly descriptive, parser-based interactive fiction games where you type in commands like go north or take key.
And the fascinating thing about Inform 7 is its programming language, which is based on natural English syntax.
That's right. Instead of writing complex conditional loops and functions, you define the game environment using plain English statements like, the shed is a room, a shovel is in the shed.
Amazing.
It dramatically lowers the barrier for writers and narrative designers, allowing them to build these deep, descriptive worlds that interact based on verb-noun commands, just like the seminal text adventures of the 70s and 80s.
For those leaning toward more visual and complex narrative experiences, the sources highlight RenPy.
RenPy is currently the dominant modern visual novel engine. It's built entirely on Python, which makes it highly portable and flexible, and it's immensely popular for creating complex, graphics-heavy interactive stories, including dating simulators.
And why is it an ideal fit for the Raspberry Pi?
Because it's Python-based, it runs natively and efficiently on Raspberry Pi OS. RenPy specifically supports both 32-bit and 64-bit Raspberry Pi OS architectures, ensuring smooth performance on the latest RP Hive hardware. It can handle high-res graphics, sound, complex branching narratives. It makes the Pi a viable platform for distributing and playing professional-grade visual novels.
Finally, let's look at building simple, fun games using Python and Pygame or Pygame 0 and leveraging the Pico strengths for physical input. The sources provide two excellent examples of simple, yet technically deep, game creation projects.
First is Molbop, a classic whack-a-mole style game. This is a perfect example of a project that forces the user to move beyond pure screen coding and into physical computing.
What's the specific hardware challenge here?
The game is played using a 16-button keypad, but to read 16 buttons using a low-cost microcontroller like the Pico, you quickly run out of physical input pins, so the project necessitates the use of the MCP23008 I2C expander chip.
Okay, explain the expander chip simply. Why is it required?
The I2C protocol is a serial communication bus that allows multiple devices, in this case 16 buttons, to communicate with the microcontroller using only 2 or 4 wires instead of 1 wire for every single button.
So it saves a ton of wiring.
A ton. The MCP23008 chip effectively multiplexes those 16 inputs onto the Pico's I2C bus, dramatically simplifying the wiring while still enabling the user to track which of the RGB LED backlit buttons lights up and which one gets pressed. It's an essential lesson in hardware efficiency.
The second example is a classic recreation of Pong, which focuses on the challenge of analog input.
And this is perhaps the most crucial lesson in physical computing for the Pi platform. Pong requires analog input to read the smooth, continuous movement of the paddles. The controls have to be highly responsive to turning knobs.
And here is the core architectural limitation we have to address. The Raspberry Pi, despite all its power, is a digital processor that uses digital GPIO pins for input.
Precisely. The Pi's GPIO can only read 2 states. High GH, which is a 1, or LOW, which is a 0. It cannot inherently read the smooth, continuous spectrum of rotation from a potentiometer or turning knob.
So how do you solve that?
To achieve that analog input, the user must wire their potentiometers into an external component, the MCP3008 analog to digital converter, or ADC.
So the ADC acts as the translator.
Exactly. It translates that continuous electrical signal, the analog signal, generated by turning the potentiometer into discrete numerical data, a digital signal, that the Raspberry Pi can then read and use to move the paddle position accurately on the Pi game screen.
These projects, especially Pong and Moldapip, they really force the learner to understand how the physical world of electronics interfaces with the digital world of code.
And that is the foundational mission of the entire Raspberry Pi ecosystem. It's a comprehensive training ground electronics, coding, architecture, and nostalgia all rolled into one.
This has been an extensive deep dive into a tiny, powerful machine. What stands out most profoundly is the sheer versatility and, I guess, the dual identity of the Raspberry Pi platform.
It really is.
It's a single machine that can handle low-level, high-fidelity, cycle-accurate emulation of an Atari.
And complex 6th-gen consoles via the processing power of the RPI-5.
It can use professional-grade customized controllers, and at the same time, it serves as an accessible development platform for creating entirely new, retro-styled hardware and software.
The Pi's success in the retro scene is built on accessibility, but it's sustained by ingenuity. It can seamlessly shift roles. It can be a dedicated, speed-optimized console when you're running lockup.
A full, flexible development machine when you're using RetroPie.
And a highly specialized low-latency interface device when the Pico is involved in reading proprietary memory card protocols or simulating vintage CPU I/O using its PIO state machines. It has moved the enthusiast beyond just passive consumption into active preservation.
We've documented a community that has moved from simply playing classic games to actively preserving the complex physical hardware experience, recreating rare machines like the Sol 20, building custom commercial arcade art, creating ingenious technical bridges like the Pico Memcard and the barcode scanner game loader.
The entire ecosystem is driven by that desire to own and maintain these digital artifacts.
And that desire is made possible by the accessibility of the hardware and the open source software.
I mean, that's the true power of the Pi. It gives the learner, regardless of their prior technical expertise, a direct, affordable, and flexible path to understanding, owning, and modifying the very digital artifacts they enjoy. The sources we looked at have demonstrated the complete journey from beginner hardware setup to advanced, low-level, PIO-based hardware simulation.
So we'll leave you with this final provocation to mull over. We've seen enthusiasts revive decades of gaming history using a computer the size of a credit card. If the Raspberry Pi can so faithfully resurrect the gaming machines of the past 40 years, what seemingly obsolete, forgotten technology is waiting in your attic or your garage for you to breathe new life into it?
Is it an old communications device, a piece of industrial control equipment, or a specialized vintage display? The tools are affordable, the community support is vast, and architectural limitations, like needing an ADC or an I2C expander, are really just interesting puzzles to be solved.
The future of retro gaming preservation is happening right now, driven by makers who see an opportunity not just to play, but to build.
The only thing missing is the project you choose to take on next.
That's it for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.